There were real alligators on set for Linda Kozlowski's 1986 movie. Guards with guns stood in the trees. For Crocodile Dundee, she slept in old uranium mine huts that had been abandoned. The movie made her well known. It also made her a bad housewife. Her co-star left his wife and 5 kids to be with her. Australia didn't like her. Every day, people told her they would kill her, but then the worst part came. She found something that changed everything after 23 years of marriage. She is now a Muslim, lives in Morocco, and gives tours to rich people. Why, you'll be shocked by the real reason. The 7th of January 1958 saw the birth of Linda Kozlowski in Fairfield, Connecticut. After the war, her folks left Poland and came to the United States to find better things. Helen and Stanisław used to be their names, but they changed them to Helen and Stanley to fit in. They didn't have much, but they worked hard to make things better for their daughter. For them, America meant being safe and having chances. It became the place where Linda sought and found fame. That was her last year at Andrew Ward High School. People knew she was talented even back then. She led the school plays, not just played parts. She knew not only her lines by heart, but also the whole book sometimes. She helped other people out when things went wrong. People in the area talked about how well she played Emily in our town. Some people said she made them cry. That doesn't happen very often at high school shows, but Linda was already unique and everyone who saw her knew it. That wasn't all she did. It is very hard to get into the Juilliard School in New York City, but she did it. Not even a dozen make it. There is a lot of attention among students. She did 2 things. She acted and she sang opera. That wasn't like that. There were a lot of busy days and long hours, and there wasn't much sleep. She kept going, though it all. Her teachers remembered how quickly she could go from giving a dramatic speech to singing an Italian aria. The way she looked and the way she was working made it clear that she was building something bigger. By 1981, she was only 23 years old and already taking the stage professionally. A show called How It All Began was put on with her. Immigration and identity were big ideas in the play, and they hit home for her in a deep way. There were more than 200 women who tried out, but Linda got the part. Critics took note. She was called a surprise by some. It wasn't just a nice thing said. People who hire actors will remember that review. She thought this was more than just a good show. It was the beginning of everything. The next movie was Death of a Salesman. It was 1984, and she got a small part in a big show. An old Arthur Miller play was brought back to life on Broadway, and it was full of famous people. Miss Forsythe was played by Linda. Even though it wasn't the lead part, she stood out. Her scene stood out. She gave the character new life, which the New York Times said was great. Not only did that act make people respect her in the theater, it also made people notice her in Hollywood. Soon after, a new chance came calling. In 1985, actors were being sought for a strange Australian film. The name of it was Crocodile Dundee. It was a simple idea. For a wild date, put a tough Aussie man with a smart, interested American woman. They didn't want a big star, they were looking for someone new. Linda tried out. She had worked on TV and in the theater, but she wasn't well known. A huge number of other women also wanted the part. But something clicked when she read lines with Paul Hogan. They didn't try to have chemistry. It made sense. She got the part. It came with a $500K deal for 3 movies. That was a huge deal for someone who hasn't used a screen much. She didn't just take the money and show up, though. She got ready. She learned some Aussie slang. She learned about the society. She didn't want Sue Charlton to feel fake. She wanted her to feel like a real person. Everything worked when they started shooting. Fun, love, and Charmant all worked well together. Making Crocodile Dundee was just as crazy as the movie itself. A scene of a river attack in Australia's Northern Territory was one of the most violent parts. At least on film, Linda Kozlowski, who played Sue Charlton, was almost dragged into the water by a huge crocodile. But there was more going on behind the scenes than just playing. For close-ups, the crew used a fake crocodile, but real crocodiles were swimming alongside the whole time. There were armed team members in the trees, ready to use their rifles if a real croc got too close. The movie was shot in Kakadu National Park, which is not at all like a movie set. There were not any hotels or trailers there. The actors and team slept in old huts that uranium miners had left behind. It felt like a risk with every take. You can really feel the fear on the screen. Behind the scenes, things were just as tense. An emotional crisis hit Paul Hogan, who played the lead role and co-wrote the script. In 1958, he got married to Nolene Edwards. They had 5 kids together. When the movie was shot in 1985, though, their marriage was barely holding on. In 1981, they got a divorce and then got married again not long after. They were about to get a second divorce in front of a lot of people. While all of that was going on, Hogan and Linda Kozlowski were getting along very well. On screen, they really did get along. In fact, it was so real that rumors began to spread. There was a lot of hate in Australia for Kozlowski in the press. "I'm not a great husband," Hogan said later. It wasn't fake emotion that showed in his performance, it was his real life falling apart. There was a scene in the movie that almost didn't happen, at least not the way we remember it. Mick Dundee saying, "That's not a knife, that's a knife," is now legendary. Though Linda Kozlowski almost lost her cool because she couldn't hold back her laughter. Hogan's delivery was so dry and perfect that every time he said the line, she laughed out loud. It took 47 takes to get it right. 47. Filming on a busy New York street is hard enough without this messing up the scene. Even the crew couldn't keep it together, but that anger turned into magic, and the scene is now one of the most quoted in movie history. And that laugh, which wasn't in the final cut, told a bigger story about the bond between the two stars. That bond lit up not only the screen, but also the awards circuit. She was nominated for a Golden Globe for Best Supporting Actress in 1987 for her first major film. She was up against some of Hollywood's biggest names, like Diane Wiest and Mary Elizabeth Mastantonio. No one thought she would be in that category. She was still new, and most people didn't know who she was. But there she was, walking red carpets and giving interviews, showing that new talent could compete with established stars. Hollywood loves a good Cinderella story, but this one came from a small Australian movie that no one thought would become a big hit. But it did. Crocodile Dundee was a monster at the box office, making over $328 million worldwide on a budget of only $8 million. It ruled U.S. theaters for 9 weeks in a row and was the second highest-grossing movie of 1986, behind only Top Gun. That meant that Linda Kozlowski's first movie performance made her one of the highest-grossing new actresses of the decade. Not bad for someone who had been sleeping in mining huts just a few months before. The movie's success didn't just change her career, it made her famous. Her face was everywhere, and her part in one of the most popular comedies of all time is still a high bar that not many new actresses have ever reached. Crocodile Dundee made Paul Hogan famous all over the world in 1986, but there was a much more personal story going on behind the scenes. Hogan fell in love with his American co-star Linda Kozlowski while filming the movie. It couldn't have happened at a worse time, because he was still legally married to his longtime wife Nolene Edwards. Hogan married Nolene in 1958, divorced her in 1981, and then married her again in 1982. They had been together for over 30 years and had 5 children when they finally split up for good in 1989. When Hogan filed for divorce the second time, everyone took notice. Crocodile Dundee became a huge hit, and everyone started to watch. Some people wondered if the marriage ended because of Kozlowski. She was almost 20 years younger than him, and their chemistry on screen seemed too real. Both Hogan and Kozlowski said that they started dating when his marriage was already falling apart. Fans were shocked that Hogan, who was seen as the perfect family man, was leaving his wife for a younger woman from Hollywood. The media couldn't get enough of the story. Australian tabloids called it the Outback Affair, and it was all over the news in Sydney and Los Angeles. Reporters followed them around like paparazzi and even camped outside their homes. The more they tried to keep quiet, the more rumors spread. Hogan was called an enemy of the Australian ideal, and Kozlowski was seen as the epitome of everything people disliked about Hollywood drama. Hate mail and even death threats were sent to Kozlowski by angry fans who called her the home wrecker and blamed her for ending a 23-year marriage and a well-loved family. She had just become famous, but now she was the target of deep hatred. To stay safe, she stopped going to public events and hired security. People felt sorry for Nolene, Hogan's ex-wife, who was raised 5 kids by herself and was seen as the hurt mother. They felt sorry for her, but they were also angry at Kozlowski. It was no longer just a scandal, it had become dangerous. For more than a year, Hogan and Kozlowski tried to hide everything. They met in secret in hotel rooms and used fake names when they checked in. They came and went at different times and even sent each other coded messages to talk. Not many people knew what was really going on. It was hard to live that way. The lies, the pressure, and the secrecy all added up. Eventually, the truth came out and Hogan's marriage was over. When Crocodile Dundee 2 came out in May 1988, it wasn't just a hit. It was a global box office beast. It made over $239 million worldwide, even though it only cost $14 million to make. Fans all over the world couldn't wait to see Paul Hogan and Linda Kozlowski back on screen. Again, Linda got a huge raise. Her pay for the sequel was $2 million, which is $240% more than for the first movie. That sounds like a win, but Paul Hogan still made more. He was the star, but he also wrote the script. The pay gap was hard to ignore, though, because the sequel broke records at the box office, making $24 million in Australia. $9 million, which is about $60 million today. In the U.S., it opened with $24. $5 million over Memorial Day weekend, which was the biggest comedy opening ever. It went on to become the 5th highest-grossing movie of 1988. Linda was a worldwide star, but Hollywood didn't treat her like an equal, even with all of her success. After the movie did well, a lot of scripts came in, but they all looked the same. Linda was only offered parts like the girlfriend or the pretty sidekick. There were no leads or depth. She was just eye candy next to a funny man. She was offered parts in Ghost, Pretty Woman, and Basic Instinct, all of which rose to fame. A movie called Pretty Woman made over $463 million, and Sharon Stone became famous because of it. But Linda said no. She didn't want to be just another pretty face on screen with no real role. This surprised people in the business because who turns down roles like that? But Linda wanted more. She had trained for serious roles. Then there was Pass the Ammo, a dark comedy with Bill Paxton that was supposed to be different. It had a $8 million budget and a bold take on televangelism, but it bombed badly, making only $169,000. That's a loss of more than $8 million, and the movie quickly went away. People didn't like it when Linda was in a movie that didn't do well at the box office. One minute, she was riding high on a global hit, and the next she was in one of the worst movies of the year. The industry didn't take it well. Instead of blaming the writing or direction, they blamed her. The parts she played got even smaller. Linda Kozlowski wasn't just a pretty face on screen. She had trained at Juilliard and performed on Broadway, so she had real talent and a lot of experience. But Hollywood didn't care. All they saw was her as Paul Hogan's girlfriend, and that wasn't just her movie role. In real life, it became her nickname. Getting married in 1990 made it harder to escape the stereotype. When she came back to Los Angeles for Crocodile Dundee in 2001, it felt like she was stuck in the past. No one saw her other work or training. They only saw the American girl in the Australian comedy. In 1989, she had had enough. She told her agent she was ready to quit because she was sick of the scripts being pushed to the side and Hollywood acting like she didn't have anything else to offer. She had just been through a bad movie run and had seen other actresses do great with roles she turned down, and she was still being treated like a supporting character in her own career. It was not only annoying, it broke her heart. She was ready to give up fame and money to get away from the trap. Linda Kozlowski had a hard time becoming a mother. She tried for almost 8 years after marrying Paul Hogan, but couldn't. She was stuck, emotionally drained, professionally frustrated, and afraid that she would never be a mother. When she finally gave birth to their son Chance in 1998, she was 40 years old. It felt like a miracle, and she had almost given up on becoming a mother. In an interview a few years later, she said those were the hardest years of her life. She said she was unhappy at her last 2 acting jobs because all she could think about was having a baby. She wanted it so badly that it took over her life. When Chance was born, it was like a new beginning for both of them. By the time she was 43, she said she had finally found peace. "I have a child. I'm happy and content," she said, adding that it was everything she had hoped for. But happiness couldn't fix everything. When Chance was born, it became even more clear how different Linda and Hogan really were. Hogan liked peace and quiet and family life. Their love for their son was strong, but they were growing apart. Years later, when Chance was in his mid-20s, the news would focus on him. He was described as messy, and Hogan looked worried. These worries reminded everyone that the problems don't end when the cameras stop rolling. Linda's acting career wasn't going well either. After her big break in Crocodile Dundee, things started to go downhill. In 1990, she was in Almost an Angel with Hogan again, but it didn't go well. The movie bombed and critics were harsh. Roger Ebert said that Linda's performance was wooden and uninspired, which hurt because she had been seen as a rising star. Now she wasn't getting as much attention. The roles got smaller and cheaper over the years. In 1994, she was in 2 direct-to-video movies, Backstreet Justice and The Neighbor. She later said they were bad and she hated making them because the stress of it gave her an ulcer. In that kind of setting, she felt like she was the only one who cared about doing a good job. It wore her down. Things weren't better at home either. She and Hogan were always moving back and forth between Los Angeles and Australia, partly because Hogan had tax problems. She never felt truly settled or at home, though. Everything was just temporary. In October 2013, after 23 years of marriage, Linda Kozlowski filed for divorce from Paul Hogan. Fans were shocked. This wasn't just any couple. They met on the set of Crocodile Dundee and stayed together after the movie was over. People in Hollywood thought their relationship was one of the few that went well. There were no big scandals or messy headlines, but things were falling apart behind the scenes. Linda said they had irreconcilable differences, which meant nothing to most people, but meant that things had slowly changed for them. She was sick of waiting for him to leave his old life behind and the emotional and physical distance. Paul was still tied to Australia, and Linda wanted something else. The cracks became more obvious when court documents came out showing that Paul Hogan smoked 2 packs a day, while Linda had switched to a cleaner, healthier lifestyle. Their house smelled like smoke, and so did their fights. Plus, Paul was said to be drinking more, and they fought more. Their teenage son Chance was stuck in the middle. The house that used to be full of laughter and scripts was now silent and tense. These weren't just bad habits. They were walls that got higher between them every year. When the settlement terms were made public, more people were surprised. Linda got $6,250,000. Of course, the money came with conditions: no child support or spousal support. Chance was only 15 years old at the time of the divorce. This one didn't. Linda wanted to leave quickly. Some said she was tired of everything, while others thought she was reclaiming her independence after decades of giving in. No matter what, she took the lump sum and left. In the interviews that followed, Linda was honest. There was no scandal or secret betrayal. There was just 2 people moving apart. "We were more like roommates than husband and wife." She said he liked quiet days in Australia, while she wanted to try new things. They only talked about things like the grocery list or picking up the kids from school. The love that started on a movie set had slowly faded away. It wasn't explosive. It was slow and quiet. The divorce was finalized on July 23, 2014. That date held a lot of weight because it was exactly 24 years and 2 months since their wedding on May 5, 1990. They had been together for almost 25 years, raised a son together, and shared a spotlight. But even strong stories can have soft, quiet endings. The divorce papers were signed, but that wasn't the end of Linda's story. In less than a year, she was in the busy markets of Marrakesh in 2015. She thought she was just on vacation when she met Molly Hafid Baba, a charming Moroccan tour guide with a big smile who knew a lot about his country's culture. They hit it off right away. They laughed, talked, and walked around the city's confusing streets together. It was like something out of a movie. Linda was 57 years old. She had just finished one chapter and was stepping into a new one out of the blue. By 2017, even more had changed. Linda and Baba were married in a lively Moroccan ceremony with over 200 guests. She had become a Muslim and changed her name to Layla instead. She learned Arabic, cooked Moroccan food, and wore traditional CF The 3-day wedding was full of music, food, and color. Linda called it a rebirth, and it was clear that she had left Hollywood behind. The next big step was when she and Baba started Dream My Destiny, a high-end tour company. American tourists could book private rides, balloon rides over the Atlas Mountains, and dinners with Berber families. The business took off, and in just 2 years, they had over 500 clients. In 2020, they made over $2 million. Linda hosted many of the guests herself. Her fame from before helped, but it was her new life that sold the dream. It was a big deal for her when she sold her Venice Beach apartment for $8 million in 2018. She had lived there for years, but she was done with the Pacific. With the money, she bought a riad in Marrakesh's old Medina and fixed it up room by room with Baba. It turned into their home, full of old things, art, and stories. The scripts and red carpets were gone, replaced by lanterns, spices, and a slower pace of life. Linda Kozlowski didn't just leave Hollywood. She chose something quieter and deeper after years in the spotlight. Now she lives in both Marrakesh and Los Angeles. She is still an American citizen, but it's clear that her heart has found a second home. In Marrakesh, the call to prayer wakes her up every morning, and she runs through the Menara Gardens, past rows of old olive trees. Breakfast is simple but wonderful: mint tea, fresh bread, sweet amalu, and ripe local fruit. Her days are paced by the city's rhythm. She walks through crowded souks, picks out spices by hand, talks with vendors, and looks for restaurants, riads, and quiet spots that most tourists miss. She's not just exploring. She's planning with her husband, Mule Hafi Baba, a seasoned local guide. She runs a custom tour company called Dream My Destiny that gives tourists a more personal look at Morocco. At night, she can be found at a hammam spa or a cozy cafe, taking in the warm air and city lights. She lives in 2 different worlds, but they both fit together. Her old life didn't go away, it just changed shape. Paul Hogan, who played her on-screen partner and later married her, is still a part of her story. They got married in 1990 after making love on Crocodile Dundee. They had a son together and made memories together for over 20 years. When they split up in 2014, it wasn't a bad thing. Linda agreed to take the $25 million settlement, but she didn't want any ongoing help. She wanted a clean break and to share responsibility for their son, Chance. Now that Chance is an adult, he connects his father's ties to Australia with his mother's new life in Morocco and California. Paul and Linda stayed close. There is no public drama. They just respect each other. In a town known for messy breakups, theirs is a rare story of a lasting friendship. Linda has no regrets. She is clear about why she quit the movie business after Crocodile Dundee in Los Angeles came out in 2001. She was offered parts in movies she called schlocky, which means they went straight to video. They were so awful that she says they gave her ulcers. It wasn't worth it. She was sick of shallow relationships and a business that cared more about money than meaning, So she quit, not angry but glad. She said, "It was the best decision I ever made." She worked on increasing her chances. She made a life for herself away from red carpets and photo ops. Now she leads tourists through Morocco, learns about culture, and finds happiness in simple, everyday things. She's become an example of not only starting over, but also leaving something that doesn't serve you anymore. Her story isn't about giving up fame. You need to find something better,